Hello, welcome to Loremaster's Library. I'm your Loremaster, here to begin our end of the year exploration of real-world topics that might inspire your tabletop game. We have a major release in Pathfinder this coming year in the form of the Tian Shi books. But what say you do not want to use the Asian-inspired settings as provided by Paizo and Wizards of the Coast? Well, if you are playing a system without such offerings, or if you're building your own homebrew setting and need a place to start. Fear not. I'm here for you today and for the next few weeks, laying out the basics of China, Japan, Korea, and Mongolia, in hopes of inspiring you for your next East Asia-inspired campaign. But, without further delays, let's get started. We start with the big one today, China. China is one location known as a cradle of civilization. Traces of early Yangtze and Liao civilizations tracing themselves back to around 7000 BC. Chinese myths tell of the beginnings of the region developed by the 3 sovereigns and the 5 emperors. The sovereigns include those like the god siblings Fuzi and Nuwa, who created man, and the divine farmer Shenog, but might also include in its number the Great Yellow Emperor, if he is not counted among the emperors. The 5 emperors, well, the list varies, were the ones said to have introduced fire, writing, and irrigation to the people. Legends then tell of the establishment of the Xia dynasty, where the people organized under Yu the Great for the purpose of creating canals to turn back the destructive floods. Next, the Shang dynasty was established by a family who helped turn back the Great Flood, and is the first which is supported by clear archaeological evidence. But it was the Xiao who first established the idea of a mandate of heaven, that it was the will of the higher powers that the emperor was given the right to rule. This era would see a rise in both a feudalistic system as well as the establishment of various philosophies, including Confucianism and Taoism, both of which would eventually grow into native Chinese religions. However, eventually, the empire would collapse, leading to a period known as the Warring States period. Eventually, rule of China and the beginning of Chinese history began with the uniting of the empire under the rule of Qing Shi Huangdi. Considered the first united Chinese emperor, the Qin began establishing his empire through methods including the building of the Great Wall to protect against raids from the northern territories, and the control of knowledge, through an event known as the burning of books and the burying of scholars. I don't really need to tell you what that entailed, do I? However, Qin was obsessed with establishing an eternal rule, and attempted to find several ways to establish eternal life, including the drinking of mercury. Needless to say, he died early. His empire would only last the rule of one more before another civil war would break out. But on the ground that Qing Shi Huangdi had cultivated, China would grow. After the 4-year Civil War, Liu Bang was able to unite the warring states, establish the Han Dynasty, which Han is a name that those ethnically Chinese would refer to themselves as ever since. The Han Empire was China's first golden age, talked about as we in the West talk about Rome. To pay for military campaigns to conquer certain territories, the government would privatize salt and iron in government monopolies, and the government spread the Confucian idea of 4 occupations, those being scholars, farmers, artisans/craftsmen, and merchants/traders, to establish what became a typical way of life. Science-wise, this era also had scientific advancements, including paper-making, rudders, negative numbers, raised relief maps, hydraulic-powered armory Amelie spheres, I'm not going to ever be able to say that correctly, and seismometers. One more thing of note is the warfare with the Xingnu people of the steppe, who, as peace treaties twice intermingled them with the royal family. With time, the peace between them resulted in the first instance of the famed Silk Road. Of course, the Han Dynasty would eventually fall into infighting. Whether it started because of the Yellow Turban Rebellion or because of a puppet being placed upon the throne, the War of the Three Kingdoms began. This is one of the most famed times of Chinese history, so I will be brief. Three kingdoms: the Shu Han Kingdom, the Cao Wei Kingdom, and the Eastern Wu Kingdom, each took control over parts of China, eventually resulting in the victory of the Jin, which partially through the war took over from the Wei. This in turn led to a series of short-lived empires known as the Six Dynasties. While the south would be consolidated around the end of the Three Kingdoms era, the north broke into 16 kingdoms, many of them formed by the barbarian clans of the north, before eventually solidifying under the rule of the kingdom known as the Northern Wei, which was founded by one of those barbarian clans. This brought about an era of relative stability known as the Northern and Southern period, the big mark left on this time period being the introduction and spread of Buddhism. Finally rose the last of the six dynasties, the Sui, or the first dynasty after the six dynasties, depending on how one wants to count it. The Sui were brought about by the reunion of North and South, finally bringing China to one piece for the first time since the beginning of the Three Kingdoms. The era only lasted 30 years, but it brought about both roads and the Grand Canal. It also brought about the use of imperial examinations to determine government positions, a concept since the Qin dynasty, but first established here and would continue to be used for following dynasties. And it also laid the groundwork for the next dynasty. The Tang took advantage of the collapse of the Sui to take power. Like the Han before them, they took advantage of what was built by their previous empire to build what would amount to a second Chinese Golden Age. The capital, Chang'an, served as the most populated city in the world for most of the dynasty. This era also had China looking outwards, both establishing the Silk Road and acting as protectorates for nations like Japan and Korea. The era is considered the height of Chinese poetry and saw the rise of many forms of leisure, like archery, hunting, horse polo, an early form of soccer called Cujo, tug of war. There were grand festivals developed for the New Year, Lantern Festival, and other national holidays. They even developed the concept of time off. And science saw advancements in clockwork, the invention of printing, advancements in cartography and alchemy, and the classification of all medicines in use across the nation. However, the dynasty itself would eventually collapse. Over the years, more and more power had been given to military governors in the different regions which the Tang controlled. It reached a point where the central authority had so little power that these warlords were the ones conducting foreign affairs. This led to a half-century known as the Five Dynasties and the 10 Kingdoms, where there was a rapid turnover of central authority trying to take control, while various warlords were acting as their own nations. While the Song Dynasty would eventually regain power, the North was again independent under the Liao Dynasty, again led by those that the Han majority of China referred to as barbarians. And the region known as Vietnam would gain independence and never again be fully under Chinese control. So arose the Song Empire, which is divided into two eras. The Northern Song had the dynasty in control of a majority of traditional Chinese territories, and continued skirmishes with the Liao, as well as the successors of the Liao, the Western Xia, and the Jin. The Southern Song, meanwhile, came when even more of the country was taken control of by the Jin, and the capital was forced south, which, while the traditional center of China was now under foreign power, the agricultural strength of the lands the Song were in control of led to another era considered a golden age. Technology in this era included the first use of gunpowder weaponry, the use of a compass to determine true north, and the study of anatomy to determine the cause of a person's death. Also, the economy of China during this time period, around the 12th century, was 3 times that of the entirety of Europe around the same time. But eventually we have the rise of Mongolia and the Khanate, which spread far and wide. Being next to Mongolia, China was straight in a warpath. This led to the Yuan Empire starting with Kublai Khan, which, when the Khanate would eventually break up, the Yuans became one of the first successor states of the Mongolian Empire. Under the Mongols, there was a new 4-class system formed, but those of the Southern Song were at the bottom, followed by other Han Chinese, which this category included non-Han Chinese and Koreans for some unknown reason. Then other foreigners like those from Central Asia, Tibet, the Jewish, the Christians, the Muslims, and at the top, of course, were the Mongols. So more Mongolian era than a Chinese one, so we will skip it for this week. Eventually even the Mongols fell, and various rebellious groups fought to become the next leader of the country, with the eventual leader being the Hongwu Emperor, who established the Ming Dynasty. The dynasty worked to establish a royal people who were completely self-sufficient from the courts. But the methods used were less farmland utopia and more forced labor used to keep fed the other pet projects of the Ming, the 1 million-fold standing army and the largest stockyard in the world. The Ming would see China gain more control in Central Asia and send trading voyages out into the Indian Ocean as far as Arabia. But this was also the age of exploration for Europe, and the rise in desire for Chinese goods led to hyperinflation of the currency, much to the confusion discussed at the New Rich. The government was also reformed, becoming 1 Grand Secretariat under the Emperor, and 6 ministries under him: the Personal Ministry, the Revenue Ministry, the Ministry of Rights, the Ministry of War, Ministry of Justice, and Ministry of Public Works. It was also this era where the 4 classical Chinese novels, the Romance of 3 Kingdoms, the Water Margin, the Journey to the West, and Jin Ping Mei were all written. As for scientific advancements, this era saw many European findings drifting into the country, but China was still the cutting edge when it came to gunpowder at this time, inventing landmines, exploding cannonballs, and 10-barrel hand cannons. But the combination of hyperinflation and the Great Plague caused a weakening of the Ming state. Eventually, while China tried to intervene in the Japanese invasion of Korea, the Jurchen people, which is an ethnicity which took the opportunity to gain control, they would take both Korea and Mongolia before pushing out the Ming, starting the Qing dynasty. The Ming loyalists would flee to the island of Taiwan in a mirror of what would happen with Republican and Communist China later. While a nation did exert power over its neighbors, it would eventually lose to the industrialized West in the Opium Wars. This led to the nation forced to sign various uneven treaties with the West, leading to various rebellions and what is known as the Century of Humiliation, which lasted to the end of the Qing, the Republic of China, and ended with the establishment of the People's Republic of China, But since I'm stopping these videos right before the modern era, let's take one last look at the science. The early Qing, despite stereotypes at the time, were more than willing to learn the sciences of the West. And after the Opium War showed China the power of the then still early industrialization, they are more than willing to start the self-strengthening movement to bring railroads and other modern advancements to their lands, willing to take the technology of the West if it meant they would never be beaten so badly again. So, with all that said, let's break this down a bit so you get a taste of what we are dealing with the above. Looking towards ancient, China is a nation which tells tales of first being built by the gods, then by rulers who gave them knowledge. Most of the early emperors started their dynasties due to working to stop the flooding of their homes, until the point of the divine mandate, which tossed around towards the end of it. The equivalent of the classical era began with the short-lived rule of the first emperor, who built walls and burned books to build the foundation the true First Golden Age was built upon, which itself was around the time of the Roman Republic, then Empire. However, soon division struck, and the next hundreds of years were met with three-way wars, which ended with the South being won and the North made into several kingdoms, before one of them, a barbarian one, managed to gain control. Then what is the mid-imperial period, around the same time as Europe's Middle Ages, we have a second golden age after the reuniting of the country, only to again fall into infighting and division. It again has a third golden age, but with only half the size of the country at full breadth, and their neighbors, once considered barbarians, controlling the north most of this era. And eventually, with one of the barbarian kingdoms taking the entirety of China for its own. Overall technology during this era is at times 5 centuries ahead of Europe, and the economy is far stronger. But then came the reign of one of the most powerful empires of history, where the people who had been in charge found themselves at the bottom of a 4-tier totem pole. They would rise again and greet the Age of Exploration with one last attempt at a great power for their people, but did so by destroying their currency and breaking the backs of the people, resulting in a minority in their country, creating one last dynasty which found itself standing evenly with other powers. But the moment other nations industrialized, they treated them like just another land to be colonized, and spend the final march of what would be the modern era, with the nations using them as they see fit, as they themselves slowly work to find a way to slip the yoke, one way or another. And that ends today's video. So that's one nation down, 4 more to go this month. Next week we'll be looking at Japan. It's a favorite of the West, so I'm sure some of you are looking forward to that, but I'll see you then.